Hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about something very exciting, driving a Ferrari. More specifically, we're going to be talking about your first Ferrari drive. I'd like you to picture the scenario. Perhaps you've popped off to Las Vegas for a holiday and you've decided to treat yourself to a supercar rental, do that thing, blitz up and down the strip all day. Or maybe a good friend of yours has bought one and he's offered you a go of it. And then all of a sudden you think, well, hang on a minute, I've never driven a Ferrari before. Is it easy? Is it the same as other cars? I mean, how hard can it be? It's just a car, right? What do you do with it? How do you drive it? Is it any different to a normal car? Do you need to be worried? Well, no, you don't, because in today's video, I'm going to be telling you all the little things you need to know about driving a Ferrari you might not have realized you had to ask about. In order to make this video, I of course need some Ferraris. And once again, I have to say thank you to the good people at Meridien Modena for allowing me to come down and film with some of their glorious stock. Now, the showroom is at the moment still closed to the public. So I'm over here in the Classic A department, all on my lonesome, and I have to say, this is not a bad place to be. I've had to come down today because my 550 needs a little bit of quick emergency work, and so I'm essentially waiting for that to be done and making use of the time by filming for you all. So what do we have? Well, here representing the classic era of cars, and for classic era really I'm saying that's any car which is probably only available with a manual gearbox. Really anything from sort of the mid-90s and before. So here we have a 512 TR with less than 10,000 miles on the clock, and if you know your presenters, Chris Harris has something I believe very similar to this. We then move on to what I call the modern classic cars. That's really anything from about 1995 to sort of 2010. Cars which often had the F1 single clutch automated manual gearbox in them. Cars like this 360 Challenge Stradale, which will be familiar to viewers of the Car Guys channel. And behind me we have this gorgeous 16M. That's the Spider version of the 430 Scuderia. To a lot of people of my age, this is the sort of generation of cars that we often think about when we think Ferrari. Finally, we have the modern era of cars, and for that we've got a bit of a treat for you because we're going to be showing you around the brand spanking new Roma, an example of which is just over there. So we're going to show you around the old cars first and then take you around the new one. First up, how do you actually get in the car? Well, you'll need to unlock it before you do anything else, and if it's a car of this era, there is a chance it won't have a remote fob at all, so you'll have to unlock it with the key. It probably has central locking, so you don't have to unlock both doors manually, but if you're looking for a remote fob, you may be wasting your time. It's only really from the sort of mid-90s onwards, so 550, 360 and so on, where you'd find a remote fob as standard fitment on a lot of Ferraris. I appreciate there's a lot of people out there who'll think, well, yes, of course you have to use a key to get into and unlock your car, but remember, not everybody watching grew up in the same era. Now, before you do get in the car, quick word about footwear, because that's very important. Today I'm wearing my Pilates, which I'd say are not actually the best choice of a driving shoe. They're perhaps a little bit wide for a lot of other cars in this particular showroom. But if you aren't used to driving older cars, you may find that the pedal box is not just offset, but actually quite narrow too. This is a very common thing with a lot of old sports cars. My Lotus was exactly the same way. You find it with Aston Martins, old Porsches, all sorts of stuff. It's not really a specific trait for Ferraris, but if you've never driven a sports car of this era, it's something you need to bear in mind. Now, if you're going to drive something a little bit more modern, say for example the 430 over there, you'd think because it's a single clutch gearbox and therefore has only two pedals, you'd have a lot more room in the footwell. But as we'll see later, that is a false assumption to make. So whatever Ferrari is you're going to be driving, get yourself the thinnest, narrowest, best pair of footwear you can find for driving a sporty car. The 360 has a slightly more traditional setup for getting in the car, and it's the same kind of key fob that you're going to find on the 550 and a few other cars as well. The 430 is a similar arrangement but has all the buttons actually on the key rather than this separate fob. Now this fob does two things. Not only will it lock or unlock the car, but it will also disable the immobilizer. So if I were to try and get in this car and start it now, because it's been open for a little while, it's just not going to start. To be able to disable the immobilizer, you press a button, it will unlock itself. Sometimes they'll do a beep, that one didn't, and then you have about a minute or two to start the car and you're good to go. Now, something I need to point out, if you are driving the car out and about, When you stop, you get out, you shut your door, you hit that button, and the car should lock. However, if when you stop and you take the key out, you faff around for about a minute or so, you get out, you shut the door, and you hit the button, it won't actually lock the car. What you'll be doing is unlocking it again and disabling the immobilizer. So when you have locked your Ferrari, do just give the door handle a little pull and make sure that it is properly locked, because it's very easy to not know how these things work if you aren't used to them. Some cars, like early 355s, will have an immobilizer, but it'll be a little chip fob that you just push into the dash. More modern cars have a different system, which we'll show you in a bit. Now, for some cars, the business of getting in is rather simple. Door handle will be obvious. Pull gently, car will open. If it's a frameless window, never use the glass to open or close. That's just a general rule. And then get yourself in. We'll get onto the dropping yourself in bit in a moment. If you're getting in the driver's side of the car, when you open it, you may hear a noise. There's no need to panic. That is the sound of the car's F1 gearbox pump priming itself. Entry and exit procedure may not be quite as obvious on some of the older cars in particular. You'd imagine that this is how you get in the car, right? Well, you'd be wrong. The door handle is actually in fact hidden down here, and it's the same you'll find also on the 355. Now, not technically a Ferrari, but still part of the family is this beautiful Dino. And if you're going to get in one of those, you do need to exercise extra caution, because these little handles here are quite delicate. Don't just grab them like you normally might. Use one finger only and pull from the center of the lever. That's all it takes, and then in you bob. And these ones are a bit of a squeeze. Now the actual process of getting yourself into the car. And luckily, this is much easier than trying to do the same thing with an Elise, an Exige, or anything like that. In fact, in Ferrari world, it's only once you get back to, say, something like the Dino that it actually becomes anything of a struggle for people of most sizes. Now, I've cheated a little bit, and I've chosen the 430 16M here because it doesn't have a roof, so you can see me a little bit better. It's actually got loads of room inside. This is one of the benefits of Ferrari's aluminium architecture. So you'll find something like a 458 or 488 has a lot more room inside it than, say, an equivalent McLaren. Those have got pretty big sills that you need to get over. I don't really mind it, but it is something to be aware of. So, open the door. Make sure that you don't hit the door on the wall, and then you want to get your left leg, or right if you're getting it from that side, into the car as far as it'll possibly go, and then essentially drop yourself down. You want to try and not catch the edge of the seat for two reasons. Number one, you'll wear the seat. Number two, it'll hurt. So you just do the process reasonably quickly. So in and down, and in here there's loads of space. We have plenty of adjustment. This being a more modern car, actually I've got acres of space. To set your driving position is actually pretty simple. In something like the 430, procedure is much the same as in any other car. The steering wheel has full adjustment, will actually move a reasonable way, and you want to make sure that your wrist sits about there on top of the steering wheel when your arms are outstretched. For the pedals, you want to make sure you can depress both all the way without your leg being fully extended. That's because in the event of an accident, you want your leg to bend and not go sort of all the way up. Again, standard car fare stuff. Now in this, these are bucket seats. They are manually adjustable in one direction only, forwards or backwards. Little bar under here. Then you've got excellent, plenty of room. And actually, this is a really, really comfortable car. To get out, you're going to find usually a fairly small, dainty handle. In this case, it's right down here. It's aluminium. And out you get. The 512 features what you might call a more traditional Italian driving position. Now the sill is a little bit wider here. The entire car feels on the inside quite a bit smaller, and you're going to have to find yourself doing slightly strange things to get the right driving position here. There is no adjustment on the steering wheel in this car, or many from this era. In terms of seat adjustment, this is pretty basic. You've got forwards and backwards, and you can adjust the seat back angle too. Pedal box in here, as I warned you, is extremely tight. You'll also notice that the wheel is very much off-center, as are all of the pedals. So before you go anywhere in a car like this, do make sure to get yourself nice, comfortable, and familiar with it. In something like this, my pilotis really are a little bit too wide. I'm not actually driving anything today because, well, that's not what this video is about. This video is about all the things you need to know before you drive. Starting the car is actually a fairly simple piece of business. Make sure the immobilizer is disabled one way or another. There'll be a little red telltale in most of these cars to tell you whether it's off or not. In a modern car, if the key's in it, generally you're pretty good. Something simple like the Testarossa 355, simply turn the key, engine will start as you're probably used to in most ordinary cars. Something like the 430 will have a start button. You still need to put a key in, turn it to get the ignition on, and then press the button to start the car. However, be aware, this is only an engine start button. It's not a start-stop button. To turn the engine off, you have to turn the key once more. Don't press the start button again. In more modern cars, it's much simpler. Just be in the car with the key, foot on the brake, hit the start button, and generally you're good to go. Unsurprisingly, something like this 512 doesn't really have much in the way of driving modes that you need to worry about, but there are a couple of things that I should draw your attention to. Firstly, the world-famous Ferrari gated shifter. Now, in a 6-speed car, works pretty much how you might expect it to. For some reason, a lot of people are afraid of a gated shifter, but I think they're absolutely wonderful things. However, in a 5-speed car like this, first will almost always be a dogleg gear. That means it's where you'd expect to find second, so over and down. Over and up will actually be reverse. Now, it's not that easy to engage that by accident, because to get into reverse on this and others like my 550, you have to push the gear lever down, move it over and up. So you don't need to worry too much about going into the wrong gear or into reverse by accident. But do remember, first is over and down. This is a throwback to racing, where going into first gear wasn't something you really had to do all that often. But being able to go between second and third quickly was quite important. So putting those on the same plane just made cars a little bit quicker. Otherwise, the gearbox really is pretty easy. When these cars are cold, the gearbox may not be entirely cooperative. A lot of people will tell you that old Ferraris, when they're cold, second gear won't be available for the first 20 minutes. In some of these, that's true, but in others, it isn't. In either case, whatever car you're driving, don't rush the gearbox. Don't just smash through the gears like it's a Civic Type R. Take your time with it, and it will thank you for it. It'll be a lot smoother, a lot better, and you'll really enjoy the experience. However, as much as people often talk about the gated shifter, there is one thing in these cars people forget that I think is even more important to discuss. This, the handbrake, specifically the fly-off handbrake. Now, if you get into a Ferrari and the handbrake's in the middle of the car, it's going to operate like you expect it to. These don't though. Now, there's a very specific way that you work these handbrakes. To engage it, you simply pull up and you'll feel it engaging. Now, you'll notice then the handbrake can flop down. That's because you don't want it getting in the way of you getting into the car. To disengage it, you simply pull it up until you'll feel the resistance, press the button in and hold. Put it down, the light will go off on the dash. Make sure that light is off, then you're good to go. These, by the way, are the levers which will get you into the front or the back of the car. While we're here, I mean, it'd be rude not to, wouldn't it? Oh, yes. Storage on these cars is often not as bad as you might think either. In fact, most of them have got quite a bit of space up front. A lot of the old cars will be hinged this direction, so just be gentle when you're opening it and do not try and open it from that end, but it should be fairly obvious how it works. And as you can see, there is a lot of room in here. When it comes to closing it, standard thing, lower it gently, get it about a foot off close, then just let it shut itself. Then find out where the clips are and do each side on its own. Sometimes on smaller cars, it might just do itself, but do just check. Give it just a little pull. Don't be too firm on these. Sometimes they're aluminium, they can bend. Just find out where the thing latches in, gentle push, it'll click, test it, all good. Once you get to the F1 box cars, things do get a little bit more complicated. Luckily on these, you can actually practice your gear shifts without needing the car running. So, get your key in, turn, ignition will come on. Then the car will start in neutral. The Challenge Stradale, by the way, has a start button down here, so that's different to the regular 360. We've also got some modes. We're going to talk you through modes on the 430. So you're in the car, and let's just pretend it's running. Put your foot on the brake. Notice how far I've had to move my leg over to actually get to the brake pedal, and still a very narrow pedal box. So to engage first, very simple. Pull the lever, and you can actually hear the car go through into first. And in fact, you can work through all the gears with the car just here in neutral. You can hear the F1 box doing all of its thing. Now, to get back into neutral, you pull both paddles at the same time. Ferrari don't really do sort of parking brakes. Simply get the car in neutral, pull the manual sort of handbrake lever on, that's it. In some of the newer cars, it will say something like hold if you've put the button-operated parking brake on. That's essentially the same as the car being in park. To get into reverse can be a little bit less obvious because it's not somewhere where you'd expect it to be. It's a button, typically down here in the center console. So, and you're in reverse. The car will beep. That does not mean it has parking sensors. That's important. You could make a very big mistake. You can then go straight into first, should you be performing a maneuver, pull both levers, and there you are. The F1 paddle shift gearbox that Ferrari were using in this era on cars like the Challenge Stradale, later 355, and the 599 is a single clutch automated manual box. That means the gearbox itself is actually still a manual, but the clutch and gear selection are instead controlled robotically by what was actually for the time a fairly sophisticated piece of electronics. Now, this does mean that you can't drive them like a normal automatic. In fact, Ferrari only ever made 2 cars, to my knowledge, with a traditional torque converter auto, the 400 series and the 456. All of the others have either this F1 box or the later dual clutch. The dual clutch is actually very good at changing gears itself, and driven in auto mode, it's perfectly fine. The F1 box really is designed for you to choose what gear you want to be in, and then it's going to be a much nicer experience. So I've shown you already how to change gears, and you essentially do that like you would with a manual box, change at the same points. Now, if you're changing up, I'd recommend just lifting off the throttle just a little bit. You'll find it smooths the shifts a hell of a lot. And if you are driving enthusiastically, when you're shifting down, blipping the throttle a little bit will also speed up downshifts. This is quite a surprise to me because you wouldn't think that would be the case. You'd think the car would do it for yourself. But actually, even in the 430, giving it a little blip on the downshift really will make a difference. The one thing you really want to avoid doing with these cars is creeping. Because it still has a regular clutch in it, when you're moving at sort of walking pace, it will be working the clutch, making sure that you keep an even pace. This means it's going to be wearing it down. So where you can, if you're in traffic, don't just sort of creep forward a little bit, particularly on a hill. Make sure you move off with authority. Don't spin the wheels, don't be an idiot, but just move off with some certainty. And then when you come to a stop, put the car in neutral, put the handbrake on. The clutch will last a lot longer. The car will thank you. If you do leave the car in gear for an extended period, it will put itself in neutral, but it will beep several times to tell you that it's done so. An important word about gauges. Old Ferraris have proper gauges, and quite a few of them. So you're likely to find your battery voltage, which don't worry about too much, oil pressure, so long as that doesn't say nothing when you're driving, don't worry about that one too much, and your 2 temperature gauges, oil and water. Expect them to move. For example, today in my 550, it's been very cold and I've been driving the car 70 miles an hour on the motorway. So you're going to find the temperature gauge will be sort of just below or just above its very first notch. Not off the scale, but just sort of only, about 5-6 mil along. In summer, I was sat in traffic in the car and they were completely the other way, right towards the edge, almost in the red zone. This movement of the temperature gauges is completely normal. It's another thing, all cars used to do it. And in fact, even in your modern car, the temperature will go up and down. It's just that because some people are very silly, they're now programmed to all stay exactly in the same place unless something's gone tragically wrong. So with all these cars, don't worry about it. And if you are being good and taking time to get the car warmed up before you enjoy some of its performance, don't worry. Once the oil has got to sort of a third of the way, or its sort of first numerical marking, that may be as warm as the car's going to get until you start pressing on, unless of course it is a very hot summer's day and you're in the middle of traffic. And Ferrari is not really a company that likes to stand still, and it prides itself on its technological innovations. It's amazing that just over a decade separate this car and the 512 over there, or this one's predecessor, the 348. And in that time, the car grew by some 200 horsepower. It gained electronic adaptive suspension, advanced traction control, and a whole host of other features. Now, in the 360 and the Challenge Stradale, you get the beginnings of some of these features. So you have in there a race mode, you have also launch control, which incidentally, unless you own the car, do not use launch control in these. I believe in the Enzo you got something like 3 goes at launch control and then you needed a new clutch. And I don't know exactly how much a new clutch in an Enzo is, but it's a lot. Luckily for you, the first Ferrari you ever drive is probably not going to be an Enzo. In fact, something like this has probably got a much better chance. And although these are closely related to the 360, there are some key differences. You'll find down here the reverse button, exactly where it was more or less in the Challenge Stradale, but you now also have the auto button and LC, launch control. The horn in these cars, by the way, and in certain other Ferraris like the 550, is not actually the centre of the wheel, it's here. Now this car is very well equipped, being a 16M. It has the LED lights at the top of the steering wheel to tell you when you need to shift, but don't go lighting those up too much on your first go out. Now what this car does have that I want to talk to you about is the Manettino switch, and the 430 was the first Ferrari ever to get one of those. Even the Enzo didn't have it. And this is inspired directly by Ferrari's Formula 1 races, and it's a simple way of controlling all of the different systems in the car. Now you'll find different settings depending on what kind of Ferrari it is that you're driving. For example, Portofino will have different settings to this. Roma, different settings again. So in the 430 you have a familiar lineup which you'll have in most of their sports cars, the mid-engine V8 stuff. In this 16M, things are actually slightly different to how you'd find them in, say, a regular 430. In one of those, you'd find ICE, low grip, sport, race, and then CST or CST off. The ICE setting really is the most aggressive one, and honestly, if that's the setting you feel like you need to use, just don't drive the car, because I don't think you're really going to enjoy your first Ferrari driving experience. But if you absolutely have to, if it's howling down outside and you're not so sure about the car's tyres or whatever, put it in that mode. You won't be able to change gear yourself. The car will have really aggressive traction control, and it will deliberately make sure that it's as stable and smooth as possible. Driving a modern Ferrari in poor conditions is nowhere near as daunting as it used to be. Older cars, stuff like the 355, they can be quite nerve-wracking, especially in period with the tyres that we had at the time. So that's not something you need to worry about too much nowadays with the little Manettino. You then have low grip mode, which is a lot less restrictive than the ICE one. You can change your own gears, and if you're really still nervous about driving the car, the conditions are okay, you can use that one if you want. But honestly, the one you probably want to use is sport. Note on cars like this, and even the regular 430, there is no comfort setting, there is no normal mode. Sport is your regular mode. Beyond that, you have race. Race will stiffen up the suspension, it will quicken the gear shifts and make the car, say, just a little bit more aggressive. On more modern cars, there are a whole heap of different things that it will be adjusting. This car has an E-diff. In fact, it's one of the first cars in the world to have an electronically controlled differential. Another very trick piece of technology Ferrari adapted from their Formula 1 cars. And these different settings will alter how that differential works. You've then got a couple of modes here, CT and CST. On the regular 430, you just get a CST, and a CT is a kind of intermediary mode. I don't really understand these too much. The CST, if you twist the thing around, hold it, car will go beep, and it'll tell you that you've disabled everything. Only really ABS is going to be remaining. If you've done that, you're on your own. Don't do it. Just don't do it. Sport and race mode will give you more than enough leeway, especially race mode, to have quite a bit of fun in a car without getting into serious trouble. Once you turn the whole thing off, that's it, you're on your own. And there's more than enough people on YouTube who have shown that that's not a great idea. Now, one innovation that this car brought, and you'll then find on later cars such as 458, is the bumpy road mode setting. So there's a separate button. So if you want to have race mode and race gear shift and all that jazz, but you don't want the firm suspension, you can decouple the two settings. And that's then a separate button on most steering wheels on these cars. It's an innovation that came in with the 16M. You're not going to find it on the regular 430, and it's something I think Ferrari do, which is absolutely genius. Most of the times I get in one, turn the thing around to sport if it's got a comfort mode, or race, and then hit bumpy road mode, and you'll find actually these cars can be really quite comfortable. Now we're nearly there with the classic Ferraris, and if you've got to that stage, you're pretty much home free, because driving them really doesn't need to be scary at all. They're very docile cars if you want them to be, and every time I've heard of someone getting in trouble on the road in one of these, it has been self-inflicted. They're very stable, very well-planted cars. As long as conditions are even remotely decent and the car has been well maintained with good tyres on it, you should have no issues whatsoever. Take time to familiarize yourself with the controls, and not just where they are, but the weightings of them too. Things like the throttle pedal in particular may be very different to what you're expecting. So just take some time, get used to it, find a car park if you can, where you can really just get a feel for all the different controls and make sure that you're absolutely happy with the car. If you've driven any sort of very sporty car of this vintage, hopefully nothing here is really going to be too much of a surprise. But even once you are on the move, these cars will still have the odd little thing just waiting to catch you out. Like, for example, how to fill it up. Finding the petrol flap is not difficult at all. There it is, same place on the 430, same place on the 512, on my 550, it's on the right hand side of the car, always pretty easy to locate. The button that opens the flap is easy to find too. It's usually somewhere close to hand if you're in the driver's seat. In these cars, it's just to the right of the steering wheel. My 550, it's on the center console. However, 9 times out of 10, I'd say when you go to open it, it won't open. That's because these will only open with the ignition on. Trust me, we've all done it. Pulled up at a petrol station, take the key out, hit the button. Oh no, something's gone terribly wrong. Don't worry, it hasn't. Oh, and while we're at it, 99 octane, please. Or 93 if you're in the USA. Oh, and if somebody's told you to check the oil before you take the car out, do exercise some caution. Many Ferraris, like this 360, are dry sumped, so you can't just check the oil. In fact, if you look at this, you wouldn't really be able to find the dipstick, but it's in fact here. It is this nice cap. Now, the reason you can't just go and check the oil is because of that dry sump system. When the car starts running, it'll start pumping oil around, and the oil can expand, after a fashion, up to about 10%. These cars carry about 10 litres of oil in them. So when the difference between minimum and maximum on the dipstick is a litre, well, that means that actually, depending on the temperature the car's at, it could tell you it's either totally full or completely empty. So do check the owner's manual for whatever car it is you're going to drive. That'll tell you the correct procedure for checking the oil. In fact, in these, you do it while the car is running and up to temp. Generally speaking, you're probably much more likely to overfill the car than you are to actually run it dry, especially if you're only driving for a short period of time. So if you're absolutely unsure or uncertain, or you can't find the owner's manual, just phone your local main Ferrari dealer, speak to their service department, and they will tell you what you need to do. And that, hopefully, is just some of the things you might need to know if you're going to drive a classic Ferrari. But what if you're going to get the opportunity to drive a new one? The brand spanking new Roma. This, by the way, is an absolutely amazing car. If, like myself, you weren't really sure what to make of it when Ferrari announced it, please do not overlook this car, because it is absolutely sublime. Easily one of the best GT cars I have ever driven. Very fast, extremely comfortable, and certainly a proper Ferrari, and different enough from the Portofino to warrant its own nameplate. But really with this car, the big changes Ferrari have introduced can be found on the inside. The Roma is all change for Ferrari. That begins with this key, which is beautiful and very different to any that's come before it. It has a little place to hide, which is just down here. If you didn't know about it, you wouldn't realise, but that is where it goes. The steering wheel is quite different to that which came before. Now, I have actually skipped over a generation here with the Roma, because there was the 458, the F12 and stuff like that, which came in between the 430 and cars like this. This one is a complete redesign. This is going to be what Ferrari is going to be using going forwards. It's debuted in the SF90, has now come out in the Roma, and you're going to see it in cars going forwards. The big change is on the steering wheel. Now, Ferraris for a little while have had a lot of buttons on the steering wheel for all sorts of functions. And broadly speaking, this is actually similarly laid out to 458 and so on and so forth. But the difference is they're capacitive buttons for many functions. The engine start-stop, for example, is down here. Your Manatino switch, again, does a similar thing to what you'd imagine it would, and exactly the same thing it does in the 430, but your settings are slightly different. So you have wet, comfort, sport, race, and then ESC off. Bumpy road mode can be activated by simply pressing the button, and then you have your bumpy road mode. To change the settings that are displayed on the screen is quite easy. You use this little trackpad that's on the wheel here. So you can slide across and you'll get different functions. If I can make it work. If I hit View Max, it'll give you the biggest screen of whatever it is that you're on, usually the map. It's quite handy to have. Then you hit back and you can then scroll through the different functions. So you can go down, up, left, right. If you hit left and right, slide through it, it'll just give you different screens on the right for whatever you want, and then up and down will give you different options within those screens. On the back of the wheel, so just hidden behind here, you're going to find stereo controls for volume and station. Indicators are here. Now on the Roma and a few other cars like GT Voluso, they've got little fins on the back, which means they're a little bit easier to press. Before 458, they're just buttons and they're a little bit awkward. These are much improved. So these move and these don't. Very confusing, takes a little while to get used to, but you will get used to it, trust me. You have your washers and windscreen wipers and all that sort of stuff here. You have headlights here to flash your lights, just pull towards you and you'll see they're flashing. And that's pretty simple, really. The key, if it's in the car, means the car is ready to go. Be wary about leaving the ignition on for too long because you will drain the battery fairly quickly. Your wing mirror controls are all down here. Gear shifting is done slightly differently. It's designed to look like a sort of old school lever, but it's not. These are buttons. So you've got automatic, you've got manual, you've got launch control, you've got reverse. Otherwise, procedure is same as in the 430. So you just sort of put your foot on the brake and pull, and it will go into gear if the car is on. This one won't move out of park when I'm in neutral. Ferrari do also have a propensity for hiding stuff in the roof. So if you are looking for a button of some sort, like a start-stop on the Lusso, you'll find it hidden up here. This has also got door lock and stuff down here. This center screen here, not too hard to work out. You've got climate control options, seat options, all that sort of stuff. So I can feel actually this heated seat is actually already on. So you've got different things down here, audio, phone. And over here you have the passenger display too, which lets them view all sorts of different interesting functions and features. But by and large though, driving the Roma is very easy. It's an 8-speed dual clutch gearbox, very nice car, very fast. And to get out of it, you simply press that button down there. So there we have it, just a little video from me with a few things about driving a Ferrari you may not have known. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. I want to say a big thank you again to Meridien Modena for allowing me to come down here and film while my car is being worked on. If you have any questions, queries, or would like to share your stories about your first ever Ferrari driving experience, please do pop them down in the comments below. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you all for the next one. Bye-bye. Now, I've no actual reason to sit in this £1.2 million F40 other than I want to and I can. But I suppose as I'm here telling you how to get into a Ferrari, I should just check that my theory does work with all of them. Yeah, be delicate with it. Very high sill on the F40 here, and of course because I'm getting it from the left hand side, it's right leg first, then drop yourself right down. This one's a bit tighter than the others. Yep, quite a bit tighter. Really, really tight actually. The headroom is actually the issue here. That is a surprise. Oh yes. Wow, it is teeny in here. I've never sat in one of these before. Sat in an F50. Or have I? No, I haven't. I've sat in an Enzo. Wish I could take this somewhere. If anyone out there is the lucky owner of an F40 and they're happy for me to drive it, do let me know. To get out, you pull the wire that's here. Very race car. Then extricate yourself in a best and tidy fashion, being very careful not to put force on the windscreen pillar or the sills. Use these Kevlar sills here, they're strong, the rest of it not so much. That wasn't dignified at all.